Good morning. It is Wednesday of Holy Week. Jesus entered into Jerusalem on a donkey to the shouts of praise by the crowds of people who understood him to be the Messiah. And this is the last week of his life, and things are starting to get a little bit testy as Jesus challenges temple leaders and their practices and their beliefs. And so today I want to share a little story about what Jesus does when he comes into Jerusalem. Here in the first few days of the week, he goes to the temple. And let me read what Mark chapter 11 says about this visit. Then they came to Jerusalem. And Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him. For they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. The temple. It was a huge constructed area. There was an internal sanctuary area, but there was also a huge courtyard within the walls, but outside of the sanctuary. And that courtyard was the size of multiple football fields. And people would make an annual pilgrimage to the temple for their sacrifices, for the sins that they had committed throughout the year. And they would come from all over to this place, to this temple, because you didn't have a church on every street corner like we do today. Well, there's a couple of important parts to understand why Jesus would have gotten so angry in this place. So first of all, only Jewish people, Jewish men, were allowed into the temple itself. There were others, Gentile men, who could go into the courtyard area, but only Jewish men could go inside the temple. And so you had all kinds of a mixture of people in the courtyard area. And there were a few ways that the temple made money. Like every other organization, you need money in order to be able to make the organization run. You have administrative costs, you have salaries, etc. But there was a temple tax that was required for people who were coming in for their annual pilgrimage into this temple. And that tax was equal to about 1 day's pay. So each person that came into the temple gave a temple tax. And then on top of that, there were money exchangers inside the courtyard, because there was only a certain type of coinage that was allowed into the temple court. And there were people coming from all over, and so there were many different types of denominations and types of money that were being used. And so they would come in and they would have to exchange their money, kind of like if you go into a foreign country and you have to exchange your dollar for a foreign currency. You had all kinds of money exchangers there who were making profits off of the exchange. The exchange rates were fairly exorbitant. And then, of course, you had the people who were bringing their sacrifices. And there were strict laws as to what type of an animal you would sacrifice in the temple. Depending on what type of a sin you were asking forgiveness of would depend on the type of animal. It could be a dove. It could be a sheep or a goat. It could be a bull or a calf. And so those animals had to be pure. They had to be spotless. And if people were traveling 100 miles, there was some risk about bringing the animals along. They could get stolen, they could get sick, they could get injured, and then not acceptable for sacrifice. So what the temple had allowed was in the courtyard, they would allow these tables to be available where people could sell sacrificial animals. So if I need a sheep for my sacrifice and I am not willing to take the risk of bringing a sheep 50, 60 miles to the temple, I'll wait till I get there and I'll buy a sheep at the temple that I know will be acceptable, and I can then have my sacrifice. But the animal trade was quite lucrative as well. And so the people who were selling the sacrificial animals were selling them at an extremely high price. And you can believe that the temple leadership, the chief priests, they were getting their portion of all of these sales, of all of the income coming into the temple, was making its way into the pockets and into the accounts of the temple. They were making a lot of money on something that was meant to be for worshiping God. The people coming to worship God were being taken advantage of financially. And Jesus saw that. And so when he saw it, he began tipping over the tables and driving people out. In fact, he quoted the prophet Isaiah, "Is this temple not a place of prayer?" And that's why he called it a den of thieves, a den of robbers, a cave of robbers is actually what the original Greek says. You're taking advantage of people. And the scribes, the chief priests, they didn't like it because they were being exposed. They were losing a huge aspect of their income. And they couldn't just tell Jesus to stop because the people were so enamored by him. He was popular. And they were unwilling to start a civil war. And so the chief priests, they began coming up with a plan to get rid of this guy who is stirring up a lot of trouble. Tomorrow is Maundy Thursday, and I will be sharing a reflection tomorrow morning on Maundy Thursday, the institution of the Lord's Supper. I hope you have a good day, and God bless you as we move through the rest of Holy Week. Goodbye.